Good evening, Clayton Mayor Jody McLeod. I'd like to call this regular town council meeting to order. And I would like to ask you to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for the invocation. I pledge allegiance to the
flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation,
under God,
indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
Most gracious and heavenly Father, we thank you so much for your blessings of this day. Thank you for being with us through these uncertain times. Now be with us as we proceed with the business for the town of Clayton, for it's in your great name we pray. Amen. All right, do we have any adjustments of the agenda?
This is the town manager, and there are no adjustments, Mayor.
All right, no adjustments. Then we'll move right on to consent agenda.
I move we approve. This is Art.
Second.
So we have a motion to approve the consent agenda by Councilman Holder and seconded by Councilman Granis. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. All right, up next under old business will be the budget amendment with the basement renovation. And I'll call
Good evening,
on
Mayor,
Robert.
members of council. Tonight we're asking council to approve a budget amendment to relocate the inspections department to the basement in Town Hall. This space has been identified as the best fit for their needs. It provides easy access, creates operational efficiencies, while also providing some flexibility for future growth in Town Hall. These projects will be paid for by utilizing restricted funds generated by the inspections department in prior years. Those inspection revenues are restricted by statute and can only be used for activities within the inspections department.
All right, thank you, Robert. Any questions from council? Okay, being no questions, I'll entertain a motion. Mr.
Mayor,
Thompson.
this is Jason. I make a motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion by Mayor Pro Tem Thompson and seconded by Councilman Everett. Is there any further discussion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Granis?
As most of you know, I have been somewhat concerned about this particular item on the agenda. I just want to make it very clear that I am in complete support of any and all renovations that need to be done in this specific area. You also know that I have actually been opposed with respect to specifically where the money would come from. And although I'm not pleased with where it is coming from, I will be voting in the affirmative this evening.
Thank you, sir. Are there others? All right, if not, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
And opposed, like sign. And the motion carries. Thank you. Okay, up next is staff reports, and we'll begin with the town manager.
All right. I do have wanted to give the council an update on where we stand regarding this year's budget. But before I do that, I simply wanted to recognize Ms. Kimberly Moffett and Heidi Holland, town clerk and deputy town clerk. This week happens to be Professional Municipal Clerks Week. And as is warranted, I want to pay them respect, and I know council and mayor do as well, for all that our town clerks do for us in North Carolina, but we happen to have two of the best in Clayton. So we're very appreciative for what they do, and this is a week to honor them. So I wanted to make that everyone aware that this week of May is Municipal Clerks Week in North Carolina.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies. Thank you very much for all you do for the town of Clayton.
Well, thank you all very much. Appreciate that.
I'd say let's throw a big party and get everybody together, but we probably can't do that this week. So we'll do that some other time. So, what I'd like to do is continue with this discussion on where we are in the budget. And the point of this update is not so much to talk about next year's budget, which we will be doing with the council. We have budget discussion meetings set up on your calendar for June 1st and possibly June 2nd if needed. And we will be prepared to do that and submit a budget to you before that time period. But I think it's important that you get an update on what we think is going to happen between when this pandemic hit and to the end of the year, given all of the uncertainties out there in the communities and across our country and world, really. We want everyone to know that we're keeping a close eye on our budget and what's happening there. So if you go to the next slide for me. So here's a few points that we want to bring up based on U.S. Department of Commerce data. The first 2 points are, and not surprising, that consumer spending took a dip in March, and as well as personal income dropped. Now, we're always having to look back and understand what's happened, so we don't have April's data yet. But there's nothing surprising that we've seen spending dropping and income dropping given what's happened in our economy. So where does that leave Clayton? The third bullet point is about sales tax. And what we can confidently say is that sales tax revenues are going to decline in the last quarter of our year. And just so everybody understands, a reminder to everyone, our fiscal year starts July 1st. So our last quarter is going to be April, May, and June. And so we are predicting that we're going to see a loss in revenues that we would have realized in somewhere close to $171,000 for this final quarter of the year. Other impacts that we're seeing in our budget are, and again in this fourth quarter, are departments that are highly dependent on fees for their services that they provide are seeing a big impact, and in particular those that have a public fee or public gatherings. And so, not surprising again, our Parks and Recreation Department, where we've canceled spring sports and other activities at the Clayton Recreation Facility, we're seeing a significant decline, obviously, in revenues or fees collection in this final quarter. The other department where we have entertainment venues, the Cultural Arts Department, obviously we're not having shows and other rentals going on in our building. So those fees are also predictably going to be down in the final quarter of this year. We threw library in there too. While library is not a huge revenue generating department in terms of fees, simply because people are not going to library now, we're not seeing fees there either. So tracking those things, but we safely predict we're going to see those revenues drop off at the end of the year because of this coronavirus. Another thing that's impacting us, the governor's come out with several different executive orders. In particular, highlighted here is Executive Order 124. This order was the governor or the state's response to utility accounts. Prior to the governor's order, this town council had already decided that you were going to suspend canceling or cutoffs of utility customers due to non-payment. And the governor's order, which followed, simply made that statewide. But what it also did was made it so that we could not charge disconnection and late penalties for what amounts to, at this time, a period of April and May, really. And so I added that into this slide so that you'd see from a revenue standpoint, that's about $150,000 that we think is going to be not collected or won't be collected for those non-payment penalties. That's not the same thing as saying that those same services or utilities won't be paid for, but the penalties that would have been associated for non-payment will not be collected. And then for anyone that is struggling in this period of time, we would set up a payment plan to help them. But we would do that really for anyone, but that's mandated with this executive order. And so we will realize those revenues from those services at some point within the next 6 months. So that's a direct impact on our utility.
Mr. Holder?
That 150,000, is that a year or is that for those 2 months?
That's just for those 2 months.
That's an awful lot of penalties and disconnects.
But it's based on an estimate, and of course, we're seeing a lot of, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but we're seeing an increase in non-payments right now. That's not typically how many non-payments we would have in a typical month or 2-month period, but we're estimating that based on what we think is going to happen. Again, we've only been through April and we'll see through May, but yes, that is higher than we would typically see, Mr. Holden. Moving forward, unless there's another question on that. The other thing we've noticed so far this year is we haven't seen a significant slowdown to our development activity. And again, we're in May now, so we're getting into the 5th month of what is, again, the last half of our fiscal year. And we're still issuing building permits and inspections at a pace that's similar or with what we've seen in the past, with maybe some slight transition to new buildings as opposed to renovations going on right now. But permit-wise, it's the numbers are not far off from what we expected to see in this year's budget and what compares to last year. What we've done internally is we are in a hiring freeze, so to speak, of non-essential positions. We've restricted non-essential travel. And of course, we're continuing to monitor our revenues and expenditures as we get closer to the end of the fiscal year. So those are some of the things that we've done or reactions we've had to what's been going on with this coronavirus. If you go to the next slide.
Adam?
I'm sorry, there's a question on this one?
Yes, Michael here. With respect to the user fees in Q4 for Parks and Rec and Cultural Arts and Library, I noticed that you didn't have an estimate there. Are you able to provide us an estimate, if not this evening, certainly in the very near future?
It might be it might be what you're looking for in the next few slides. It's not that specifically, and yes, we could definitely do that for you, but you might get your answer in the next slide or two that show where our revenue and expenditure projections are going to either not meet their targets or maybe exceed them. So if that doesn't give you what you're looking for, we can get that for you.
Okay.
Okay. All right, if you could move forward for me. So I want to start off by just reminding the council that when we adopted this budget last year, around the same time period, we looked at a lot of different things, including our fund balance policy. And as we were funding capital expenditures and other things, that we made a conscientious decision at that time to utilize some of our fund balance to balance our budget. So what you're looking at is what our fund balance was. In the blue bar is our 2019 fund balance amount. And the orange bar represents when we balanced the budget last year, or adopted the budget rather. That was what we anticipated the fund balance was going to be at by year end. So we were going to spend down some of our reserves. The gray bar now represents where we think we're actually going to end up. So better than what we had budgeted. Still, we are using some of our fund balance, but again, that was a decision we made last year when we balanced our budget. So I'll use that and we'll go to the next slide for me. So you can see here our revenues. Again, we're looking at what is our budget, the 1920 budget, and then the 1920 estimate is where we think we're going to end up on these. You all know, and you can see, and you'll see in the next slide too, but property tax, or ad valorem tax, is by far our largest revenue stream. And you can see where we think we're going to end up year end on that particular revenue. Sales tax is the second largest revenue stream. And even though I already mentioned that we expect a decline in our fourth quarter, we were still up trending positive in our sales tax through the first 3 quarters of this year. So that positive over revenues, if you will, that we're coming in are going to carry us through to the end of this fiscal year, so that even with that decline that we're going to see, we still believe we'll be in the positive on our sales tax growth by year end to the tune of somewhere around $200,000. So that's significant to us as we try to get through the end of this fiscal year. What you're seeing though is that there are some revenue declines, and to Mr. Granis's question, you can see Parks and Recreation there and Cultural Arts there. Library again is not a huge revenue department anyway, and that's pretty close to budget. But you can pretty much attribute those two declines, the 239, 232 in Parks and Rec and 49, 452 in Cultural Arts, as a direct result of what we've had to do here towards the end of this fiscal year. Spring sports being one of those, and of course any performances and rentals being the second on the Cultural Arts. So that's if that's what you're looking for, Mr. Granis, that is, I think, the answer to your question. We can certainly break it out in greater detail if you wanted more than that. So that's the revenue
You've
side.
answered the question.
Okay, thank you. So if you go to the next slide, this again shows where we get the breakdown of our revenues. Again, 53%, the biggest piece of pie there in blue is going to be our ad valorem or property taxes. The orange slice is going to be your sales tax. So again, that's just where most of our revenues come from. And if you go to the next slide for me, here you can see expenditures. And what you're seeing is we've also seen a decline, or we're not going to spend as much money as we had budgeted as well, which is a good thing. So while some of those revenues are declining or maybe not coming in as strong as we'd hope, we're also seeing and putting in place, like I said, measures to not spend as much. And that is the driving reason why we're going to see, while still a dip to our fund balance by year end, not as big as a dip, because we've been able to hold back some of our spending here as the year end goes. And even with some declining revenues, we're going to see a more positive net effect, if you will, to our fund balance than what we had anticipated through the budget.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I'm a little concerned about the 695,000 public safety not being used. What did we not do? What did we plan to do there?
Well, I'd have to pull those numbers out, and I don't know if Robert Mackay has the breakdown of those, but probably a big portion of that is going to be some personnel, maybe some lapsed salaries in there, and we'd have to look at if we didn't do some capital items. But if Robert, do you know that one off the top of your head?
That's between the fire department and PD, and I believe the bulk of it is going to be on the salaries and wages. I will have to go back and actually compile the details. I didn't drill down that far into it to see what the the major contributing factors were, but I can certainly compile that information and we can provide additional feedback to council.
Right. And your public safety is always one of our, you can see there, and the next slide will show it too, but it's one of our largest, and maybe you could just advance to the next slide and help me make this point. But you can see between public safety and public works, those are the two largest chunks of our pie of spending. So those are also going to be by year end the two that have the most left over because of that. We don't budget to the a very tight margin for good reason. So if we look back at some other years, a non-coronavirus year, in other words, you would still see some significance to what probably goes unspent in some of those budgets, simply because that's how we have to manage the accounts, or else we'd run into other problems if we were running so tight to the edges that we'd run out of money. So I don't want to, I let Robert break that down for us a little more, but I don't think you'd be alarmed at other years that might have some similar kind of costs that don't materialize by year end. So those are again our expenditures broken out in 1920. And if we could move to the next slide. So now switching over now to the water and sewer fund, and there's what you're looking at here is what we realized with our revenues and expenditures related to the water and sewer side of the house. The big numbers there, and if you look on the revenue side, there's some missing numbers, are really related to some system development fees and capacity fees that never materialized. And I think that then there's some offsetting expenses then that also didn't materialize. So that's why there's some large numbers there. But you can see we're still positive as it pertains to our water and sewer fund. And again, even though there may be a couple months here in this year, this fiscal year, where maybe there's some non-payments, probably for some very legitimate reasons, that once that money, once we bill it, that's considered money to our books, and so that money will be realized. So I'm not taking out that of our revenues, even though it may not be collected as quickly as we usually do. We still do plan on collecting that. So I'm going to actually close my blinds a little bit. The sun is setting, and now I'm having this glow to me. So give me just a second. I can see again. All right. Next up is the electric fund, and you can see similarly that our expenditures to revenues are still in the positive as we forecast to the end of the year. And again, it's with electricity, it's just like water. There's different things that drive consumptions, but weather is a big factor in that. And if we go to the next slide, we should see our consumption patterns. And so this was important to us. We wanted to see our patterns of consumption being impacted by this COVID-19. And obviously the stay-at-home order was issued in March. And so we wanted to see in particular how that's impacted both residential, commercial, and industrial flow, water and sewer, and electricity. And we thought it was important to give you a sort of a 6-month window and see what's happened this fiscal year, and then be able to show you the same month period, same 6 months in the prior year. And I know there's a lot of numbers on there, but what we're seeing is actually, I think, within line with what we thought we would see. You can see the top bar is kind of last year, and the bottom chart is going to be the current year. And if you can compare them with your eyes as you go, but you can see our consumption in residential water and sewer is trending a little higher this year. I mean, with an increased population, you might expect that, but we did not see a decline, and then in fact we saw maybe a slight increase in the month of March and April over the previous year, but with a lot more people staying home, that might be expected. Commercial, again, the year was trending pretty normal. Seeing a slight decline in commercial over the previous year, but also makes sense with stores and restaurants maybe not being open like they were typically in the previous year. Industrial, on the other hand, as we talk to our major industrial partners and customers, they've indicated to us that they are fully operational, and obviously, and even in the pandemic, they're pretty critical with being pharmaceutical companies. And we're seeing an increase over the previous year in their consumption. So from a water sewer side, again, averaging it out, things are trending where we had projected in a budget. So getting us to the end of the year, we think we're going to be in a healthy shape there financially. On the electric side, you can see that is sort of the bottom half of that. Electricity, what drives electricity consumption is different every year, simply because of probably the biggest variable is going to be weather. And so while hopefully we don't see huge spikes and dips and valleys in this, we don't see anything that's alarming to us in our electric consumption, and everything seems again to be consistent with the patterns we're seeing in the previous year. And there are more variation in weather in large part for how our electric consumption goes. So I think that's the last slide. Any questions on any of that data? Any way? Again, we're happy to provide more details to you on any of those points or other questions that you might have.
Questions or comments for the manager?
Jody, maybe one question. Could you put that last slide back up, Adam? Thank you. With respect to the electric, it would seem to me that February is low. It's certainly lower, but I'm guessing that it's lower primarily because of how mild of a winter we had. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does.
Okay. I suspected that's why we would see that decline. So when I look at these figures, this is actually what I would consider a bit of a pleasant surprise at this juncture. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, yes, we would agree with you.
Okay, good.
Anybody else? Awesome. Adam, thank you so much. Staff, thank you. That's great to know that we've got some challenges ahead, but for right now, everything is pretty good. It is unfortunate that, we're not able to do as much park and recreation or the cultural arts side or the library side, but we'll get to that point, hopefully. All right. Anything else from you, Adam?
No, sir.
All right. If not, I'll move on to the town attorney.
No report, Mayor.
Thank you, Catherine. Town clerk.
No reports, thank you.
Thank you. Any other staff? All right. No other staff. Then we took requests for public comment, and I'll turn it over to the clerk for that input.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This is Kimberly Moffett, Town Clerk. And as of this afternoon, we have not received any public comment to be shared this evening.
Thank you so much. All right, and now I'll turn it over to council for comments.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Granis.
first of all, I want to commend our entire staff for the job that they're doing in this time of pandemic. To see where we are with respect to trying to carry on daily duties, I think is really remarkable. And I just want to be sure and acknowledge each and every member of our team for a job well done. The other thing too is that I want to acknowledge our citizens for really trying to do the best that they can with respect to the social distancing and staying in their homes primarily. I know, because I'm experiencing it just like the next person, sometimes it gets really kind of frustrating and you want to get out and you want to do things. And I think when we do see people out doing whatever it is that they either need to be doing or have to be doing, they're being responsible for the very most part. And I want them to know that we notice that and that I think it's very important. And I also want to acknowledge the small businesses. Being a small business owner myself, you yourself, we can truly experience what small business owners are going through right now. And it's very uncomfortable. But I want to commend them too, and I want to commend our citizens for being able to try to give the ones that are open, even if it's on a limited basis, trying to do some shopping with them to the best of their ability. And I just hope that we can continue to do what we're doing. We're not out of the woods yet, and I just don't want anybody to think that, oh, it's almost over and we can go right back to where we started from. I think all of us are in an environment we've ever experienced before in our lives, and that it's going to be different when we get back to what I'm going to call new normal, which I'm sure everybody's heard that term. But the important thing at this juncture is to be sure that the citizens know that we know their pain, but we also want to acknowledge them for the great job that they're doing trying to adhere to all of these new requirements. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Granis. Anyone else? I just do have one quick question. We know the state of North Carolina was going to be sending out information per zip code, one per zip code, so everybody in a zip code would have more data. Have we received anything like that? It's probably on the website, but I haven't looked. Not
Yeah.
Clayton, but the states.
Yes, so I can answer that question, Mayor. So it is available through the state's website, and Stacy might be able to jump on and tell you exactly where to find that, but you can look up the data by zip code. And what we're seeing in Clayton with our 2 zip codes is in 27520, it tends to have a lot because of the Springbrook home situation, which I think the majority of those case numbers that are there related to that particular location. But if you net that out, the last time I checked, the 27527 zip code had something like 18 confirmed cases. I think it was a little higher in the 27520 zip code, but that is available and updated regularly by the state. And we can certainly share that out if you would like us to, Mayor.
I think that would be great. Thank you. All right, anyone else? All right. Mr. Thompson, were you raising your hand?
No, just adjusting my glasses, but I will make a motion to adjourn.
All right, thank you, sir. We have a motion to adjourn
I'll second.
by Mayor Pro Tem Thompson and seconded by Councilmember Art Holder. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
And opposed, like sign. And the motion carries. Good night.